The heavy oak doors of the Thorne estate didn't just open, they were flung wide with a violence that made the crystal chandelier in the foyer tremble. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, swollen with a storm that had been threatening to break all afternoon. But the real storm was inside, standing in the center of the marble hallway. Julian Thorne stood there, his face twisted in a sneer that looked foreign on a man who usually prided himself on his charm. At his feet lay 2 suitcases, cheap, battered luggage that looked painfully out of place against the pristine, polished floors. "Get out," Julian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a finality that hit harder than a scream. "The car is coming for Isabella in an hour. I want every trace of you gone before she steps foot on this property." Nia stood motionless. The cold draft from the open door bit through her thin sweater, but she didn't shiver. She stared at the man she had loved for 5 years, the man she had supported when his trust fund was frozen, the man whose tears she had wiped away when the board threatened to fire him. Now he looked at her as if she were a stain on his expensive Italian carpet. "Julian," Nia said, her voice steady, deep, and calm. "You're throwing me out. In this weather, I have nowhere to go." A dry, brittle laugh echoed from the staircase. Elinor Thorne, Julian's mother, descended the stairs like a vulture circling a dying animal. She was clutching a glass of sherry, her eyes scanning Nia with the same look of distaste she had worn since the day Julian brought Nia home. "Oh, please, spare us the theatrics," Elinor said, stepping up beside her son. She looked Nia up and down, her gaze lingering on Nia's dark skin and her natural hair. "You knew this day would come, didn't you? You must have known." "Wildflowers don't grow in manicured gardens, my dear. You were a novelty, a rebellion phase, but Julian is ready to settle down with someone compatible, someone who fits the portrait." Elinor didn't say the word, but it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Someone white." Nia looked from the mother to the son. She saw the weakness in Julian's eyes, the way he couldn't quite meet her gaze. He wasn't leaving her because he stopped loving her. He was discarding her because his mother had finally convinced him that a black wife from the wrong side of the city was bad for business. "Is that it, Julian?" Nia asked softly. "I don't fit the image." "It's complicated, Nia," Julian muttered, checking his watch. "The merger with the Sterling Group depends on stability. It depends on image. Isabella brings political connections. You bring baggage." He kicked the suitcase nearest to him, sending it skidding across the threshold into the rain that had begun to fall in sheets. "Take the severance check I left on the table. It's $5,000. That's more than you made in a year before you met me. Consider it payment for your services." Services, the word cut deep. He was reducing 5 years of marriage to a transaction, a long-term maid service. Nia looked at the check sitting on the console table. $5,000, the price of her dignity. The price of her heart. She reached out, her hand hovering over the paper. Elinor smirked, taking a sip of her sherry, expecting Nia to snatch it up like a desperate beggar. Instead, Nia picked up the check, folded it neatly in half, and then tore it. The sound of the ripping paper was sharp and loud in the silent hall. She tore it again and again until it was nothing but confetti. She opened her hand and let the pieces flutter down onto the expensive marble floor. "I don't want your money, Julian," Nia said, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with a power they hadn't heard before. "And I don't want your pity, but remember this moment. Remember the look on your mother's face, because when I come back, I won't be standing at the door, I'll be owning it." "Get out," Elinor shrieked, her composure cracking. "Security, remove her." Nia didn't wait for the guards. She grabbed the handles of her suitcases and stepped out into the deluge. The rain hit her instantly, soaking her clothes, plastering her hair to her forehead. The wind howled, threatening to knock her over, but she planted her feet. Behind her, she heard the heavy thud of the oak doors slamming shut, followed by the metallic slide of the deadbolt locking into place. She was alone, soaked to the bone, homeless. But as Nia dragged her luggage down the long, winding driveway, the tears that mingled with the rain weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fury. And fury, unlike sadness, can be used as fuel. She stopped at the iron gates. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from adrenaline. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone Julian had forgotten to confiscate. She dialed a number she had memorized a lifetime ago, a number belonging to a world she had walked away from to prove she could be loved for herself, not her lineage. It rang once. Dubois Private Counsel, a deep voice answered. This line is for emergency client use only. Identify yourself. Nia looked back at the Thorne mansion, glowing warmly on the hill, unaware that it was already burning down. They just couldn't smell the smoke yet. This is Nia, she whispered into the phone. Nia Dubois, tell my father I'm coming home, and tell him to prepare the war chest. I'm going to buy a company. Nia is about to unleash a storm that makes the thunder outside look like a whisper. But before we see exactly how the maid becomes the master, if you love stories where the underdog takes everything back, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss the moment Julian realizes exactly whose name is on his paycheck. Now, let's see how cold revenge can really be. The rain did not let up. It fell in relentless, icy sheets, turning the long, winding driveway of the Thorne estate into a river of mud and gravel. Nia walked with her head down against the wind, her suitcases dragging behind her like anchors. Every step was a battle. The expensive Italian leather boots Julian had bought her, one of the few gifts that weren't an apology for some indiscretion, were ruined, soaking through to her socks. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The adrenaline that had fueled her exit was beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep chill that threatened to lock her muscles. She reached the bottom of the hill, where the stone pillars of the main gate stood like sentries. They were closed. Julian had triggered the remote lock from inside the house. It was a petty, final act of cruelty, forcing her to stand in the deluge while she waited for help. Nia huddled against the stone pillar, seeking a fraction of shelter. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried up the moment she tore that check. Now her mind was racing, cataloging the last 5 years. The way Alina would inspect the dust on the mantelpiece and ask Nia if people from her background were used to such cleanliness. The way Julian would laugh nervously when his friends made jokes about affirmative action wives at dinner parties, never defending her, just sipping his scotch and changing the subject. She had stayed because she believed in his potential. She had stayed because she thought her love could bridge the gap between their worlds. She had been wrong. They didn't want a bridge, they wanted a doormat. And when the doormat got too opinionated, they threw it out. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, blindingly bright against the rain. It wasn't a taxi. Taxis didn't come this far out into the prestigious hills of Stone Ridge during a storm. This was a long, sleek shadow of a vehicle, moving with the quiet, predatory grace of a panther. It was a Maybach, entirely black, with tinted windows that absorbed the lightning flashes overhead. It slowed to a stop inches from where Nia stood. The driver's door opened and a large man with an umbrella stepped out. He moved with a speed that belied his age, rushing to cover her. It was heavy, black fabric, shielding her instantly from the storm. "Miss Nia," the man said. His voice was thick with emotion, a stark contrast to the robotic indifference she had just experienced from her husband. "My God, look at you, they put you out in this." "Hello, Arthur," Nia whispered, her teeth chattering. "It's been a long time." Arthur didn't waste time with pleasantries. He took the suitcases from her freezing hands as if they weighed nothing, placing them in the trunk with a reverence Julian had never shown her. He opened the rear door, ushering her into the warmth of the car's interior. The smell hit her first, the scent of aged cedar, vanilla, and the specific, comforting leather of her father's favorite car. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of home. As the heavy door sealed shut, the noise of the storm vanished, replaced by the soft hum of climate control and the faint sound of jazz playing over the speakers. "There is a change of clothes in the garment bag on the seat, Miss Nia," Arthur said from the front, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Your father gave the order the moment you called. He is displeased." "Displeased is a mild word for Marcus Dubois," Nia said, leaning her head back against the headrest. She closed her eyes. "Take me to the city residence, Arthur. I need to work. I can't face him yet. Not until I have the paperwork ready." "Understood, ma'am. We are going to the penthouse." While Nia was being whisked away in a vehicle worth more than Julian's entire annual salary, the mood inside the Thorne mansion was jubilant. The library was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with unread books. Julian poured himself a generous measure of brandy, his hand shaking slightly. He took a gulp, the burn of the alcohol settling his nerves. He turned to his mother, who was sitting in her favorite high-backed velvet chair, looking like a queen who had just ordered an execution. "It's done," Julian said, though his voice lacked the triumph he felt he should be feeling. "She's gone. I locked the gate." "Good riddance," Elinor said, examining her manicure. "I've already called the cleaning service." "I want the guest room her room sanitized by morning. The smell of that cocoa butter she uses lingers on the linens. It's cloying. We need the house fresh for Isabella. When does she arrive?" "In an hour," Julian said. He walked to the window, peering out into the storm. He couldn't see anything but rain. "Mother, are you sure about this? The timing, the divorce isn't finalized. If Isabella finds out I kicked Nia out like this." "Isabella is a pragmatist, Julian," Elinor snapped. "She knows how the world works. She comes from a family of senators and judges. They understand that sometimes you have to prune the dead branches to save the tree. Nia was dead weight. She was holding you back socially. Do you think the Sterling Group wants to merge with a man whose wife buys her clothes off the rack and talks about community outreach at galas? They want sophistication. They want pedigree." Julian nodded slowly. "Pedigree, right. And the money. The bridge loan is due next week." "If the merger doesn't sign by Friday, stop worrying," Elinor waved a dismissive hand. "Isabella's father is golfing with the Sterling CEO this weekend. It's a lock. Once the merger happens, we pay off that annoying debt and we are free. We'll be royalty in this city again, Julian, and no one will remember the little girl from the ghetto who thought she could sit at our table." Julian took another drink. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that getting rid of Nia was the magic key that would fix his crumbling empire. He didn't know that the annoying debt his mother mentioned wasn't owned by a faceless bank. He didn't know that the dead branch he had just pruned was actually the root system keeping his entire tree from falling over. Back in the city, the storm was just as violent, but from the 45th floor of the Dubois Tower, it looked like distant fireworks. Nia stood in the shower of the master suite, letting the scalding hot water wash away the cold, the mud, and the lingering feeling of Julian's hands on her arm when he pushed her. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, reclaiming her body. When she stepped out, she didn't reach for the threadbare robe she had worn for years to save money on household expenses. She wrapped herself in a thick Egyptian cotton towel monographed with the initials ND Nia Dubois. She dressed in the clothes Arthur had brought, a tailored charcoal suit, silk blouse, and heels that clicked with authority on the hardwood floors. She didn't look like a cast-off wife anymore. She looked like the CEO she was born to be. She walked into the living area of the penthouse. It was a vast, open space dominated by glass walls overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Sitting at the long mahogany dining table was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He had graying hair, dark skin that matched Nia's, and eyes that held the sharpness of a hawk. This was Marcus Dubois, the head of the Dubois banking clan and the father she hadn't seen in 5 years. He didn't stand up when she entered. He simply slid a thick file folder across the table. "You look like your mother," Marcus said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Except she had better taste in men." "Hello, Daddy," Nia said, taking the seat opposite him. She didn't apologize. She knew he respected strength, not contrition. "I assume Arthur briefed you. He told me you were standing in the rain like a stray dog," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "He told me the Thorn boy threw you out to make room for the senator's daughter. He told me they laughed." "They did," Nia said, her voice hard. "They think I'm destitute. They think I'm going to crawl into a hole and disappear." "And what do you want to do, Nia?" Marcus leaned forward. "I can buy the bank that holds his mortgage and foreclose tomorrow. I can have him on the street by noon. I can bury him." "No," Nia said. "That's too fast, too easy. He needs to feel it, Daddy. He needs to understand exactly who he threw away. I don't want to just ruin him. I want to dismantle him." She opened the file folder. Inside were the financial records of Thorn Enterprises. "He thinks he's merging with the Sterling Group next week." Marcus smiled, a slow, dangerous expression. "He thinks that, but he doesn't know that the Sterling Group's liquidity comes from us. We are the silent underwriters." "Exactly," Nia said, pulling a pen from her pocket. "And Thorn Enterprises, who holds the note on his operational capital?" "A shell company," Marcus said. "Onyx Capital, wholly owned by the Dubois Trust." "By me," Nia corrected. "You put it in my name when I turned 21. "I did," Marcus nodded. "I figured you'd need leverage one day. I just didn't think you'd use it against your own husband." "Ex-husband," Nia said. She looked at the documents. The numbers were staggering. Julian had leveraged everything, the company, the house, even Aliner's jewelry, against loans from Onyx Capital. He had built his entire life on debt, assuming the lender was some faceless corporate entity that would always roll the loan over. He had no idea he had been sleeping next to the lender for 5 years. "The loan agreement has a good faith clause," Nia said, pointing to paragraph 4. "It states that if the principal owner of the borrowing entity engages in conduct that damages the reputational standing of the lender, the loan can be called immediately. In full. Throwing a black woman out into a blizzard seems pretty damaging to my reputation," Marcus said dryly. "Then let's call it in," Nia said. She signed the bottom of the document. "Initiate the audit, freeze the assets, and Daddy." "Yes, baby girl. Cancel the security clearance for his car and for the house. I want him to know that even the technology has turned against him." Marcus took the folder back. He looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You know, once we start this, there is no going back. The city will talk. The press will dig. They will find out you are a Dubois." "Let them," Nia said, standing up and walking to the window. She looked out at the storm, imagining Julian and Aliner toasting their champagne, oblivious to the tsunami heading their way. "I spent 5 years shrinking myself to fit into their small, narrow world. I tried to be the wife they wanted. I cooked their meals. I cleaned their floors. I listened to his mother call me urban and exotic like I was a pet. I'm done shrinking, Daddy." She pressed her hand against the cold glass. "They wanted a savage," Nia whispered. "They wanted someone from the streets. Fine. I'll show them the streets. I'm going to buy the pavement they walk on, and then I'm going to charge them rent for standing there." The storm outside had settled into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the reinforced glass of the Thorn estate, sealing the occupants inside a bubble of warmth and expensive perfume. To Julian Thorn, the silence of the house felt different now. For 5 years, the house had hummed with a quiet, efficient energy, the sound of Nia moving through the rooms, organizing, cleaning, managing the invisible mechanics of his life. Now the air felt still, almost stagnant, like a museum exhibit after closing hours. But Aliner Thorn didn't notice the stagnation. She was too busy arranging a vase of white lilies on the center console, humming a tune she hadn't hummed since Julian was a boy. "She's here," Elena announced, peering through the side window. "Look at the car, Julian. That is what a proper arrival looks like." A silver Bentley navigated the wet driveway, splashing through the puddles Nia had just dragged her suitcases through. It glided to a halt, and a chauffeur emerged to open the rear door. Isabella Vance stepped out. She was the visual antithesis of Nia. Where Nia was deep ebony skin and coils of dark, natural hair, Isabella was pale, with hair the color of spun gold that hung in perfectly straightened sheets. She wore a trench coat that cost more than the tuition for Nia's entire college degree. Julian met her at the door, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Isabella, you made it." "Barely," Isabella said, breezing past him without a hug, bringing with her a gust of cold air and the scent of chemical rain mixed with Chanel No. 5. "The weather is atrocious. Daddy said the roads downtown are flooding. I hope you have something strong to drink, Julian. My nerves are shot." "We have everything you need, darling," Elena cooed, stepping forward to take Isabella's coat. She held the wet fabric with a tenderness she had never shown to her own daughter-in-law. "Welcome home, this is where you belong." Isabella looked around the foyer, her blue eyes critical, scanning the space as if she were inspecting a hotel room for dust. "It's quaint," she said finally. "A bit dark for my taste. We'll have to redo the drapes. And this foyer needs marble that reflects light better. The current stone absorbs too much." "Whatever you want," Julian said, closing the door. "We can hire a decorator next week. Once the merger signs, we'll have the capital to remodel the entire wing." "Good," Isabella said, walking toward the library. "Because I cannot live in a house that smells like—" "What is that, cocoa butter?" Julian winced. It was Nia's scent. It was faint, lingering in the air like a ghost. "I'll have the cleaners do a deep scrub tomorrow," he said quickly. "See that you do." Isabella sat in the velvet chair Elena had vacated earlier. "Now about dinner, I'm starving. I assume you've ordered from Le Bernardin. I'm craving the truffle scallop." Julian froze. He hadn't ordered food. Nia always cooked. It was a rhythm he had taken for granted: roast chicken on Tuesdays, gumbo on rainy nights like this. The kitchen was dark and empty. I forgot to call it in," Julian stammered. "With the storm and the transition, it slipped my mind." Isabella raised an eyebrow, looking at Elena. "He forgot. Does he expect us to cook?" "Of course not," Elena laughed nervously. "Julian, don't be silly. Order it now. Use the corporate account. Treat us to the tasting menu. We are celebrating, after all." Julian pulled out his phone, relieved to have a task. He opened the delivery app for the exclusive concierge service that catered to the ultra-wealthy. He selected the tasting menu, added 3 bottles of Dom Perignon, and hit order. The total came to $4,000. He tapped his black card on the screen. Processing. The little wheel spun. Julian smiled at Isabella, trying to look relaxed. "It's on its way." Transaction declined. "Please contact your financial institution." The smile faltered. He frowned and tapped retry. Transaction declined. "Is there a problem?" Isabella asked, checking her nails. "Just a glitch," Julian muttered, feeling a prickle of sweat on his neck. The storm probably messed up the signal. He switched to his personal platinum card. This one had a limit of $50,000. It was foolproof. Transaction declined. Authorization revoked. Julian stared at the screen. This wasn't a signal issue. Authorization revoked was a specific banking code. It meant the issuer had killed the card. "Julian," Elena's voice was sharp. "Isabella is waiting." I think their system is down," Julian lied, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs. "I'll just use the emergency cash in the safe. We can send the driver to pick it up." He excused himself and walked briskly to his study. He needed to breathe. He needed to understand why his cards were bouncing. He closed the study door and locked it. He went to the wall safe hidden behind a portrait of his grandfather. He spun the dial, right to 24, left to 10, right to 5. The handle didn't turn. He tried again. 24, 10, 5, nothing. A small red light on the digital keypad blinked rapidly. Access denied. Lockdown mode initiated. What? Julian whispered. That's impossible. The safe was mechanical with a digital override. The only person who had the admin codes for the house security system besides him was Nia. A cold feeling, colder than the rain outside, washed over him. He remembered the day they installed the system. He had been too lazy to read the manual, so he told Nia to set it up. She had registered her biometrics as the primary administrator. He had laughed at the time, calling her his chief of security. He wasn't laughing now. He pulled out his phone to call the bank, but before he could dial, a notification banner slid across the top of his screen. It was an email from his chief financial officer. Subject: Urgent audit alert, Mr. Thorne. We just received a cease and desist order regarding the utilization of operational capital. The primary lender has invoked the good faith clause. All accounts are frozen pending a forensic review. I cannot process payroll. I cannot pay the vendors. Who is Onyx Capital? You told me they were a silent partner. Julian sank into his leather chair. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and landed on the desk with a heavy clatter. Onyx Capital, the mysterious angel investor that had saved him 5 years ago when he was just a boy with a failing startup idea. He had never met the owner. All communication went through a law firm. He just signed the checks and cashed the loans. He looked at the dark safe. He looked at the declined food order. Julian, Isabella's voice drifted from the hallway, shrill and impatient. Are we eating or not? If you can't afford dinner, just say so. I can have my driver take me to the club. I can afford it, Julian shouted back, his voice cracking. He grabbed a heavy paperweight and slammed it onto the desk. He took a deep breath, smoothing his hair. He couldn't let them know, not yet. If Isabella smelled weakness, she would leave. If Alina knew the money was gone, she would collapse. He had to bluff. He walked back into the library, his face a mask of calm. The delivery service is down city-wide, he lied smoothly. But I found a bottle of the '82 vintage in the cellar, and I think it's more romantic if we make something simple, an indoor picnic. Isabella looked at him as if he had suggested they eat garbage. You want me to eat a sandwich in a designer dress? It's an adventure, Julian said, pouring the wine with a shaking hand. To new beginnings. He raised his glass. Isabella didn't raise hers. She just stared at him, her eyes narrowing. She was a predator, just like her father, and she could smell blood in the water. 5 miles away, the atmosphere in the Dubois penthouse was the complete opposite of the tension at the Thorne estate. It was a hub of controlled, lethal efficiency. The dining room table had been transformed into a war room. Stacks of documents were arranged in neat piles. On a large monitor mounted on the wall, a complex web of financial transfers was displayed. Nia sat at the head of the table, wearing a pair of reading glasses, a cup of black coffee steaming near her hand. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were burning with focus. Marcus Dubois paced behind her, talking into a headset, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, I want the liens filed by morning, Marcus said. I don't care if the courthouse is closed. Wake the judge up. We are calling in the debt on the commercial properties, the vehicles, and the private holdings. Yes, all of it. He took off the headset and tossed it onto the sofa. The lawyers are moving. By the time Julian wakes up, he won't even own the coffee maker he's using. Nia didn't look up from the document she was reading. It was the prenup, the document Alina had forced her to sign. Clause 7, Section B, Nia read aloud. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, each party shall retain sole ownership of assets brought into the union and any assets acquired solely in their name during the marriage. Standard, Marcus grunted. They wrote that thinking you came in with nothing, so you'd leave with nothing. Exactly, Nia smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a sharp, jagged thing. But they forgot to define assets properly. They defined it as physical property and liquid cash. They didn't include intellectual property or debt instruments. She turned the page. I bought the debt on his company 3 months into our marriage, Daddy. I acquired it solely in my name through the trust. According to their own ironclad prenup, the debt belongs to me, which means the leverage belongs to me. You trapped them with their own paperwork, Marcus chuckled darkly. Eleanor always did think she was the smartest person in the room. She judged me by my skin, Nia said quietly. She looked at me and saw a servant. She didn't look close enough to see that I was the one writing the checks. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Henry Cole, the family's lead litigator, a man who had terrified corporate boards for 30 years, stepped out. He was holding a sealed envelope. We have a court date, Henry said, placing the envelope on the table. Friday morning, 9 a.m., emergency hearing regarding the asset freeze. Friday, Nia repeated. That gives Julian 3 days. 3 days to do what? Marcus asked. To panic, Nia said, to scramble, to try and fix it. He'll try to get the merger signed early. He'll try to hide the assets. He can't hide what we can see, Henry said. We have access to his servers, Nia. We can see every keystroke. Nia stood up and walked to the wall of windows. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glittering below like a bed of diamonds. She looked toward the distant hills where the Thorne estate sat in darkness. He called me a placeholder, Nia whispered. He told me I was just there to keep the seat warm. She turned back to the two men, her face composed, regal, and terrifying. On Friday, I'm going to show him that I wasn't holding the seat, Daddy. I was the one holding up the entire building, and when I let go, everything crashes. Are you ready to face him? Henry asked gently. It will be ugly. They will attack your character. They will attack your race. Eleanor will not go down quietly. Nia touched the necklace she was wearing, a simple gold chain that had belonged to her mother. Let them scream, Nia said. Let them show the world exactly who they are. I'm not going there to argue with them, Henry. I'm going there to evict them. For the next 48 hours, Julian Thorne lived a double life. Inside the mansion, he was the doting fiancé to Isabella Vance, smiling as she critiqued the curtains and planned a renovation that would cost millions. But the moment he stepped into the hallway or locked himself in the bathroom, he was a man drowning. His phone was a relentless stream of red notifications. Payment failed. Direct deposit reversed. Account frozen. He had managed to keep the lights on only because the utility bills were on auto-pay from a separate account that hadn't been hit yet, or so he hoped. He had pawned his favorite Rolex at a shady shop downtown just to get enough cash to pay for the groceries Isabella demanded. He told her he was getting it serviced. But Julian wasn't worried about the money. Not really. In his mind, this was just a clerical error. A glitch caused by some low-level accountant at Onyx Capital. He was Julian Thorne. He was a legacy. Men like him didn't go broke. They just had liquidity issues. On Thursday morning, 24 hours before the court hearing, Julian sat in the plush leather office of Rixford Gile. Gile was known in the city as the Butcher. He was a divorce attorney who didn't just separate couples, he annihilated the weaker party. He was an older man with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been tanned in a smokehouse. Stop sweating, Julian, Giles said, not looking up from the file on his desk. It smells like fear and poor cologne. I can't access the accounts, Rixford, Julian said, pacing the Persian rug. Onyx Capital froze everything. They cited a good faith violation. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have your card declined while buying truffles for a senator's daughter? It's a tactic, Giles waved a hand dismissively. Nia probably found some storefront lawyer who filed a nuisance injunction. We'll go to court tomorrow. The judge will see she has no standing and will lift the freeze. She's a waitress, Julian. She doesn't understand finance. She probably thinks liquid assets refers to bottled water. Julian laughed, a short barking sound. You're right, she's simple. She thinks with her heart, not her head. Exactly, Giles said, closing the file with a heavy thud. And that is why we are going to crush her. I've drafted the final divorce decree. We are offering her nothing. No alimony, no settlement. We are claiming she married you under false pretenses, fraud. Fraud? Julian asked. She pretended to be a suitable wife for a CEO, Giles smirked. Clearly, she failed to deliver. We'll paint her as a gold digger who couldn't keep up with the lifestyle. The court loves a story about a poor girl trying to trick a rich man. It plays into every stereotype they already believe. Julian felt a surge of confidence. This was why he paid Giles $500 an hour. He knew how to spin the narrative. He knew how to make Nia look small so Julian could look big. One more thing, Giles said, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. You need to serve her these. Personally, it sends a message. It tells her you aren't afraid. I know where she is, Julian said, snatching the envelope. I tracked her phone before I cut the service. She's at the Bluebird Diner. The diner? Giles raised an eyebrow. How poetic. The rat returns to the sewer. Julian left the office feeling invincible. He drove his car, which was running on fumes because he couldn't use his gas card, to the south side of the city. The neighborhood changed rapidly as he drove. The manicured lawns of the suburbs gave way to cracked sidewalks and narrow brick buildings. This was Nia's world, the world he had rescued her from. He spotted the Bluebird Diner on the corner. It was a small, retro place with neon lights buzzing in the window. Parked the car illegally, not caring about the ticket he couldn't pay, and strode toward the entrance. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The diner smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and old vinyl. It was busy, filled with people shouting orders and clinking silverware. Julian wrinkled his nose. He scanned the booths, looking for the woman he expected to find crying into a cup of cheap coffee. He found her in the back booth. But Nia wasn't crying. And she wasn't wearing the rags he expected. She was sitting upright, wearing a navy blazer that looked sharper than anything Isabella owned. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, elegant bun. She was reading a newspaper, the Financial Times, and sipping tea. She looked unbothered. Julian marched over to the table, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. I knew I'd find you here, Julian sneered, casting a shadow over her table. Back in your natural habitat, Nia, asking for your old apron back. Nia didn't jump. She didn't look startled. She slowly folded the newspaper and placed it on the table. She looked up at him, her dark eyes calm and unreadable. Hello, Julian, she said. You look tired. The stress of the lie must be catching up with you. I'm not the one who should be stressed, Julian spat. He threw the heavy envelope onto the table. It landed between her teacup and the sugar dispenser. Those are the divorce papers. We're filing for fraud. You're not getting a dime, Nia. Not the house, not the car, not even the silverware. Nia looked at the envelope, then back at him. Fraud, she repeated, testing the word. That's an interesting angle. Is that what your mother told you to say? My mother sees you for what you are. Julian leaned down, lowering his voice so the nearby patrons wouldn't hear. A mistake. A charity case I picked up because I felt sorry for you. I thought I could refine you, Nia. I thought I could teach you how to be one of us. But you people. You always revert to type. The racism was no longer veiled. It was out in the open, ugly and naked. Nia didn't flinch. She took a sip of her tea. You're right, Julian, I did revert to type. I remembered that I come from a line of women who built kingdoms while men like you were still learning to tie your shoes. Kingdoms? Julian laughed loud enough that a waitress turned to look. You have nothing. You're homeless. You're sitting in a diner in the ghetto acting like a queen. Tomorrow morning, the judge is going to laugh you out of court, and then I'm going to marry Isabella, sign the merger, and erase you from history. Nia reached out and tapped the envelope with a manicured finger. "Make sure you bring your lawyer tomorrow, Julian," she said softly. "And tell Eleanor to wear comfortable shoes. It's a long walk from the courthouse to the bus stop." "You're delusional," Julian sneered. He straightened his jacket, feeling the eyes of the diner on him. He felt powerful. He had delivered the final blow. He had put her in her place. "Enjoy the tea, Nia. It's the last thing I'll ever pay for." He turned and walked out, the bell jingling cheerfully behind him. He didn't look back. If he had, he would have seen that Nia wasn't watching him leave. She was picking up her phone. "He served the papers," Nia said into the receiver. "He's accusing me of fraud." On the other end of the line, Henry Cole chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Perfect." He just entered a plea of incompetence without even realizing it. "I'll add it to the docket." "Is the forensic team ready?" Nia asked. "They are. We have the flow charts, we have the emails, we have the proof that he knew about the Onyx loans but chose to ignore the ownership structure." "Good," Nia said. She signaled the waitress for the check. "He thinks he won, Henry. He walked out of here like a king." "That's the best time to strike," Henry said. "When the enemy is looking at the crown, he never sees the guillotine." Nia hung up. She paid for her tea with a black metal card that had no limit, the same card Julian had tried and failed to use, unaware that it was a secondary card issued on her primary account. She walked out of the diner and into the sunlight. The storm had passed, but the air was crisp and cold. She took a deep breath. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot and messy. What she felt now was cold clarity. Julian wanted a show. He wanted to drag her name through the mud in front of the city's elite. He wanted to prove that a black woman from the South Side didn't belong in his world. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just prove him wrong. She would prove that his world was actually a rental property, and the lease had just expired. Friday morning arrived with a sky that was painfully bright, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged just days before. The Superior Court of New York stood like a fortress of limestone and granite, its wide steps teeming with lawyers, clerks, and the unfortunate souls caught in the gears of the justice system. To Julian Thorne, however, the building didn't look like a place of judgment. It looked like a finish line. He walked up the steps flanked by his entourage. On his left was Eleanor, wearing a vintage fur coat despite the mild temperature, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. On his right was Isabella, who looked bored, tapping away on her phone, likely rescheduling the spa appointment she was missing. And leading the charge was Rixford Gile, the shark, moving through the crowd with the aggressive confidence of a man who owned the pavement. "Remember," Giles said, not turning his head, his voice low and gravelly. "Let me do the talking. The judge is Patterson. He's old school. He hates wasting time. We paint her as a no-show or a fraud, get the default judgment, and lift the asset freeze by lunch." "I just want this over," Julian muttered, adjusting his tie. It was a nervous habit he couldn't shake. He had spent the morning trying to log into his bank accounts again, praying the glitch had resolved itself. It hadn't. The screen still read contact lender. "Are you sure she won't bring a lawyer?" "With what money?" Eleanor scoffed, clutching her purse. "She left with nothing, remember. Unless she pawned that cheap wedding ring, she can't even afford a public defender's filing fee. She'll probably show up crying, begging for mercy." They entered Courtroom 4B. It was a cavernous room smelling of floor wax, old wood, and anxiety. The gallery was mostly empty, save for a few legal interns and a couple of bored reporters who hung around divorce court hoping for a scandal involving a minor celebrity. Julian took his seat at the plaintiff's table. He felt exposed. The mahogany table felt cold under his sweating palms. He checked the clock on the wall. It was 8:58 in the morning. 2 minutes, Gile whispered, opening his briefcase and laying out his files with surgical precision. "If she's not here in 2 minutes, we move for dismissal with prejudice. She's probably stuck on the bus. Isabella whispered loudly, earning a glare from the bailiff. Or maybe she's working a shift at the diner. Julian laughed nervously. Yeah, probably. But the laugh died in his throat as the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't open tentatively. They opened with a smooth, heavy momentum held by a court officer who looked like he was ushering in royalty. The silence that fell over the room was instant. Nia walked in. She wasn't wearing the rags Elena had predicted. She wasn't wearing the cheap department store suit Julian was used to seeing her in. She was wearing a structured white power suit that looked like it had been sculpted directly onto her body. The fabric caught the light, pristine and sharp. Her hair was worn in a high, intricate braided crown that highlighted the graceful curve of her neck, and the dark, flawless skin that Elena had so often disparaged. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of simple diamond studs that sparkled with a clarity that made Isabella's flashy engagement ring look like glass. But it wasn't just her appearance that sucked the air out of the room. It was the man walking beside her. He was an older black man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a three-piece suit that whispered of old money and quiet power. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Julian, battered with the kind of wear that comes from decades of winning impossible battles. Rixford Giles, the shark, the man who claimed to fear nothing, dropped his pen. It clattered loudly onto the table. "What is it?" Julian hissed, seeing the blood drain from his lawyer's face. "Who is that?" "That," Giles whispered, his voice trembling for the first time, "is Henry Cole." "Who?" Julian asked, confused. "Henry Cole," Giles repeated, staring at the man as if he were seeing a ghost. "He doesn't do divorce cases, Julian. He represents sovereign nations. He represents the Federal Reserve. He hasn't stepped foot in family court in 20 years. Why is he walking with your wife?" Nia didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at Elena or Isabella. She walked down the center aisle with her head held high, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the floor. She took her seat at the defense table. Henry Cole sat beside her, placing his briefcase on the table with a gentle thud. He didn't open it. He simply crossed his hands and stared straight ahead at the judge's empty bench. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Patterson entered. He was a man of 60, with a face lined by years of listening to people lie to him. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the docket. "Case number 4492, the judge read in a bored monotone. Thorne versus Thorne, motion for dissolution of marriage and emergency motion regarding asset freezing. Let's make this quick. I have a murder trial at noon." Giles stood up. He smoothed his jacket, trying to regain his composure, but Julian could see his hands shaking. "Your Honor," Giles began, his voice booming a little too loudly. "Rixford Giles for the plaintiff, Julian Thorne. We are here to finalize a divorce based on the prenuptial agreement signed 5 years ago. My client also seeks an immediate lifting of the unlawful freeze placed on his personal and corporate accounts by a third party, which we believe was instigated by the defendant as a harassment tactic." Giles pointed a finger at Nia, who sat as still as a statue. "The defendant, Mrs. Thorne, has engaged in a pattern of deception. She presented herself as a woman of modest means, yet now she manipulates complex financial instruments to hold my client hostage. We intend to prove that her entire marriage to Mr. Thorne was a fraud designed to extract resources she did not earn." Julian nodded along, feeling his confidence return. Yes, that was the narrative. Nia was the villain. Nia was the leech. And, Giles continued, sneering, "Considering the defendant's lack of employment and financial standing, we ask the court to dismiss any claims for alimony. She contributed nothing to the marital estate. She was, for all intents and purposes, a dependent." Judge Patterson looked over his glasses at the defense table. "And for the defense?" the judge asked. Henry Cole stood up. He didn't smooth his jacket. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, rumbling authority of a thundercloud. "Henry Cole for the defendant," he said, "who is currently reclaiming her legal name, Nia Dubois." A ripple of whispers broke out in the back of the courtroom. The reporters, who had been half asleep, suddenly sat up straight. Dubois, in this city that name meant one thing: the bank. Dubois, Judge Patterson repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. He looked at Nia, really looked at her for the first time. "Related to Marcus Dubois." "His daughter, Your Honor," Henry said calmly. Eleanor let out a strangled gasp. "Lies," she hissed, loud enough to be heard. "She's from the projects, she's a nobody." "Order," the judge snapped, banging his gavel. "Mr. Cole, proceed." "Your Honor," Henry continued, ignoring Eleanor entirely. "We are not here to contest the divorce. My client is quite eager to sever ties with Mr. Thorne. In fact, we agree with Mr. Gile. The prenuptial agreement should be enforced to the letter." Julian blinked. What? They were agreeing. However, Henry said, "We are filing a counter-motion regarding the division of assets. Mr. Gile claims his client built his fortune independently. He claims Mrs. Thorne contributed nothing." Henry finally opened his battered briefcase. He pulled out a single, thick document bound in blue plastic. "We have evidence," Henry said, walking toward the bench. "That suggests Mr. Thorne's fortune is entirely leveraged debt held by Onyx Capital." "Objection," Giles shouted, standing up. "Onyx Capital is a private equity firm. This is irrelevant to a divorce hearing." "It is relevant," Henry said, handing the document to the judge, "because Onyx Capital is a trust, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is Nia Dubois." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Julian felt the room spin. Nia, Onyx Capital was Nia, the millions of dollars he had borrowed. The money that built his company, bought the mansion, paid for the cars. It all came from her. "That's impossible," Julian whispered, standing up. His legs felt like rubber. She's a waitress. She cooked my food. She scrubbed the floors." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge warned. "She lied to me," Julian screamed, panic taking over. "She pretended to be poor. That's entrapment." "It's not entrapment, Mr. Thorne," Henry turned to face him. His eyes were cold and hard. "It's a test. Test to see if you loved her, or if you just loved the idea of saving her. You failed." Henry turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, since Mr. Thorne has defaulted on the loan payments as of 48 hours ago, and since he has violated the morality clause of the lending agreement by publicly disparaging the lender, my client, we are moving to foreclose." "Foreclose on what?" the judge asked, flipping through the pages of the document. "Everything," Henry said. "The loan was secured by a blanket lien." "We are foreclosing on Thorne Enterprises. We are foreclosing on the Thorne estate. And," Henry paused, glancing at the gold watch on Julian's wrist, "we are foreclosing on all personal effects purchased with company funds." "You can't do that," Giles sputtered, sweat pouring down his face. "This is a divorce court, not a bankruptcy hearing." "Actually," Judge Patterson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register as he read the fine print, "this document is a confession of judgment, Mr. Gile. Your client signed it. He waived his right to a trial in the event of a default." The judge looked up at Julian. The look wasn't one of sympathy, it was one of pity. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "according to this, you don't own your company, you don't own your home, you are effectively squatting on Ms. Dubois' property." "No," Julian rasped. He looked at Eleanor. She was slumped in her chair, clutching her chest, her face gray. She knew. She understood what the name Dubois meant. It meant they were ants fighting a god. "Isabella," Julian turned to his fiancée. Isabella was already standing up. She looked at Julian with pure disgust. She grabbed her purse. "I'm leaving," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the room. "I don't date homeless men." "Isabella, wait," Julian cried out. "Let her go," Nia spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, melodic, and amplified by the acoustics of the room. She stood up and smoothed the front of her white suit. She looked at Julian, her eyes dry and fierce. "You told me I didn't fit the image, Julian," Nia said. "You told me I was baggage. You were right. I was carrying all the baggage. I was carrying you." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I grant the divorce. I want my name back, and I want my house back. Immediately." Judge Patterson raised his gavel. "Motion granted," the judge said. "The divorce is finalized." The assets of Thorne Enterprises remain frozen pending transfer to the creditor, Ms. Nia Dubois. "Mr. Thorne, you have 24 hours to vacate the premises." The judge brought the gavel down with a heavy, decisive impact that echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Julian collapsed into his chair. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. He looked across the aisle at the woman he had thrown out into the rain. She wasn't looking at him. She was already talking to Henry Cole, planning her next move. She looked powerful. She looked beautiful. She looked untouchable. And Julian realized with a sickening jolt that the black wife he had tried to erase had just erased him. The walk from the courtroom to the parking lot felt like a funeral procession for a life that had not yet realized it was dead. Julian Thorne walked with a stumble, his legs heavy and uncooperative. Beside him, Eleanor was no longer the imperious matriarch. She was a fragile, trembling woman clinging to her son's arm as if he were a life raft. But the life raft was sinking. They reached the spot where the Aston Martin was parked. Julian reached into his pocket for the keys, his fingers fumbling. He pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder, jamming his thumb against the plastic. The car remained dark and silent. The sleek machinery that had been a symbol of his virility and success was now just a 2-ton paperweight. "Start the car, Julian," Eleanor hissed, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. "People are staring." "I can't," Julian whispered, staring at the dashboard through the window. A small red light blinked on the console. The remote disable feature had been activated. The leasing company, which was a subsidiary of the Dubois Group, had reclaimed its property. "Call Isabella," Eleanor demanded. "She has a car." "Isabella is gone, Mother," Julian said, his voice hollow. "She took an Uber before we even left the building. She blocked my number." They had to take a taxi. Julian had to pay for it with the crumpled bills he found in his coat pocket, the last remains of the cash he had received for the pawned watch. The ride to the Thorne estate was silent, filled only with the sound of the tires hissing on the wet asphalt and Eleanor's ragged breathing. When the taxi pulled up to the iron gates of the estate, they were already open. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway. Men in blue uniforms were carrying boxes out of the house. Julian's boxes. Eleanor's boxes. "What is this?" Eleanor shrieked, scrambling out of the taxi before it fully stopped. "Stop, thieves, you are looting my home." She ran toward the movers, swinging her handbag like a weapon. One of the men, a burly worker holding a crate of Julian's vintage wines, simply stepped aside. "We have a work order, ma'am," the man said calmly. "Eviction protocol. All personal items not listed as structural assets are being removed to storage." "Storage?" Julian asked, walking up the driveway, his expensive suit now looking disheveled. "Who authorized this?" "I did." The voice came from the front porch. Nia stood there. She had removed her white blazer, draping it over the porch railing. She stood in a silk blouse, looking down at them from the top of the stairs. It was the exact spot where they had stood days ago, looking down at her in the rain. The reversal was absolute. "You," Eleanor spat, her face twisting with hate. "You ungrateful little witch, you think you can steal our home." "It's not stealing when you own the deed, Eleanor," Nia said, descending the stairs slowly. "And it's not your home. It hasn't been your home for 5 years. You've been living in corporate housing. My corporate housing." Nia stopped on the bottom step. She looked at Julian. There was no love left in her eyes, only a clinical detachment. "I gave you a choice, Julian," Nia said. "I tested you. I wanted to see if the man I loved was stronger than the prejudice he was raised with. I wanted to see if you would defend me when your mother called me baggage. I wanted to see if you would stand by me when the money ran out." "I was under pressure," Julian pleaded, stepping forward. "The merger, the debt. I did it for us, Nia. I wanted to save the family." "No," Nia corrected him. "You wanted to save the image. You threw me out because you thought I was disposable. You thought a black woman from the South Side was something you could use up and toss aside when a better offer came along." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys, not the house keys, a single, small silver key. "I'm not a monster, Julian," Nia said. "I won't leave you on the street." Hope flickered in Julian's eyes. "Nia, I knew you still cared. We can fix this. I can sign a new prenup. We can." "Stop," Nia said. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm not taking you back. I'm giving you a reality check." She tossed the key to him. He caught it instinctively. "What is this?" Julian asked. "It's the key to a storage locker in Queens," Nia said. "I've paid the rent for 1 month. Your clothes are in there, your mother's furs, the ones that weren't bought with embezzled company funds are in there, everything else stays." "A storage locker?" Elinor gasped. "Our Daltons, we are Thorns, we do not live in a storage locker." "Then I suggest you get a job, Elinor," Nia said coldly. "I hear the diner is hiring dishwashers. It's honest work, hard work, but maybe it will teach you the value of the people you spent your whole life looking down on." "You can't do this," Julian whispered. "I have nowhere to go." "You have the same thing I had when you locked those gates," Nia said. "You have your legs, start walking." "Nia, please," Julian dropped to his knees. The gravel dug into his expensive trousers. He was crying now, ugly, desperate tears. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I love you." Nia looked down at him. For a moment, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then she shook her head. "You don't love me, Julian. You love the safety net I provided. And now that the net is gone, you're just afraid of the fall." She turned to the head mover. "Finish clearing the house. Change the locks. If they are still on the property in 10 minutes, call the police for trespassing." Nia turned her back on them and walked up the stairs. She didn't look back. She walked through the open front door and closed it. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut was the final period at the end of their sentence. Outside, the wind began to pick up, swirling the dry leaves around Julian's kneeling form. Elinor was weeping, sitting on one of the moving crates, a queen with no kingdom. Julian looked at the small silver key in his hand. It was cold metal. It was all he had left. He looked up at the mansion, at the windows glowing with warmth, knowing he would never step foot inside again. He stood up, his knees shaking. "Come on, Mother," Julian said, his voice breaking. "Where are we going?" Elinor wailed. "To the bus stop," Julian said, echoing Nia's words. "It's a long walk." They began the descent down the long driveway. This time, there was no black Maybach waiting to rescue them. There was no secret inheritance to save them. There was only the pavement, the wind, and the crushing weight of their own arrogance. As they reached the gate, a car drove past. It was a simple sedan, but the driver slowed down to look. It was a young black woman, perhaps a student or a nurse, heading home after a shift. She looked at Julian and Elinor, 2 people in ruined finery dragging their feet along the road, and her expression wasn't one of hate. It was pity. She didn't stop. She drove on. Julian watched her taillights fade into the distance. He realized then that the world hadn't ended. It had just corrected itself. The balance had been restored. He had tried to throw the wife out with nothing, but in the end, he was the one holding the empty bag. And somewhere in the city, high above the noise and the struggle, Nia Dubois was sitting down to dinner with her father, finally, truly home. Nia's story isn't just about revenge. It is about realization. Julian Thorne made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He confused silence with weakness and kindness with subservience. He looked at Nia and saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see, a placeholder, a servant, a stepping stone. But he forgot that the strongest foundations are often the ones you cannot see until the house starts to crumble. Nia proved that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to brag. True power is the ability to walk away with your head high when they throw you in the dirt, knowing that you hold the deed to the very ground they stand on. In the end, Julian was left with exactly what he gave, nothing. And Nia reclaimed the one thing money cannot buy, her peace. We all have a Julian in our lives, someone who doubts us, uses us, or tries to make us feel small because of who we are or where we come from. Let this story be your reminder. Your value is not determined by how they treat you. It is determined by what you do when the gates lock behind you. Don't just survive the storm, be the storm. If this story of karma and ultimate redemption satisfied your soul, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people who need to hear them. Did you guess Nia's secret before the reveal? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story where the underdog takes it all back. Until next time, keep your head high and never let them forget who you really are.